I never got to mention this in a proper video, but August 1st of this month actually marks 15 years since I started making YouTube videos. Not on this channel, of course, but just in general. And I thought I'd point that out because that's kind of a notable thing. I've said it before, but I've quite literally grown up on this platform. I started doing videos when I was 11, and look at me now, 26 years old, and I'm still doing them. Might not be where I want to be, but hey, I'm enjoying making the content I'm making, and hopefully I get to where I want to get to. And I'm grateful that anyone watches these videos at all, so thank you guys if you are here watching this video right now. I greatly appreciate it, and I hope to keep making these kind of videos for you guys, like I'm going to do right now. Welcome back to I Want to Talk About, the series where I take a topic, I sit on camera, and I blabber about it. And it's the series within a series. You see the title. Today, I want to talk about my favorite games of 2012. By this point, again, you know how the series goes. I start by introducing the year, talk about the console gaming landscape, what the systems were doing at the time. I get into some big games that I didn't play, some games that just missed the cut of my two main lists, so some games that would be like a 7 out of 10 on my scale. Then there's the cream before the crop, which is the games that are like an 8 or 9 out of 10 to me. The games that I really enjoyed even if they weren't like my all-time favorites, and then the proper best list of 10 out of 10 games. So enough yapping there, let's get right into the video. 2012. I'd make a joke about how 2012 was the year we were all supposed to die, but I already did that in my 10 years later video on 2012, so I'll spare you this time around, and instead I'll say 2012, the year I started high school, and also got diagnosed with Crohn's disease. What a time. Despite all that, 2012 was actually a year I look back on very fondly. It was a very memorable year. But one thing it wasn't quite as memorable for, at least for me, was gaming. 2012 was a rather slow year in the gaming world, and to give a quick spoiler, this is the last year in this series where I'm not going to have a proper best list of 10 out of 10 games, because as much as I've given a lot of 10 out of 10s in my life, nothing that came out in 2012 got a 10 out of 10 from me. That's not to say there weren't good games, it's just that 2012 was a very light year compared to a great year like 2011. Or, as we'll get into next video, a great year like 2013. But to get into the console landscape of the time, the Xbox 360 was still trucking along and pushing a good few units in 2012, even if it obviously saw a decline compared to previous years. Outside of one big game that we will absolutely talk about later in this video, Xbox 360 exclusives in 2012 were largely Kinect titles. As I mentioned before, Xbox's first-party approach started to become a lot more Kinect-centric in the later years of the 360's life, and while this didn't result in an immediate decline or struggle for Microsoft, this felt like it was the first big moment of Xbox trying too hard to please too many people, which ultimately resulted in financial trouble and eventually would snowball into people kind of turning on the Xbox brand, but we'll get into that in the next video. On Sony's front, though, the PS3 actually pushed just ahead of the 360 in sales, at least from what my research tells me, which actually feels kind of surprising because 2012's lineup of PS3 exclusives felt rather light. You'll see some of that in this video, but a lot of remaster collections and very few huge games to really talk about from 2012. Though 2012 was the year that they released the PlayStation 3 Super Slim, I don't know what it is. This design always made me laugh for some reason. And the way the disc tray opens up, it's like they finally realized their goal of turning the PS3 into a grill years and years after people were making all the memes about it. And on the handheld front, 2012 was the year where PlayStation released their newest handheld console, the PlayStation Vita. The PSP, as I talked about in this series, was basically like a portable PS2, and it was pretty capable of playing console quality games on the go. Obviously a bit restricted, but still mostly pretty good. And it's one of the few handhelds that can actually say it went up against Nintendo and lived to tell the tale, and actually kind of sold well against Nintendo's handheld. Of course, Nintendo's handheld absolutely curb-stomped it, but it still sold pretty well. Now with the Vita, Sony was basically attempting to make a PS3 on the go. They wanted to make an even more powerful console quality handheld than what the PSP already was. Which sounds cool, it sounds like that's pretty hot and all that, but honestly, it was a goal that kind of proved a little bit short-sighted. Even back with the PSP, it felt like Sony was treating handheld gaming as if there was some kind of stigma against it, like these shorter, more portable, bite-sized experiences could never compete with a great console game. The classic and amazing animated movie can't beat a great live-action movie, which is also horseshit. So with the Vita, they wanted to continue to push that by making an even more powerful system, but the problem was, budgets for games were already increasing a lot in 2012. Obviously, they've continued to spiral, but back in 2012, they were really starting to increase. And that ultimately made the Vita even less of an exciting prospect for developers, because given how much money was going into games, period, if developers were going to be putting all this money into making console quality games for a handheld, why not just use that money to put them on a console? So ultimately, a lot of developers weren't really as on board with the Vita as they were with the PSP, and ultimately this thing kind of went pretty obscure pretty fast. I mean, it was a great system if you liked obscure JRPGs and D-remaster collections that ran at the ultimate maximum of 15.6 frames per second, but otherwise, there wasn't really a whole lot to the PS Vita that made it a must-buy system. It did get some late life as a remote play device for the next PlayStation console, so you can kind of play the games a little bit portably, but otherwise, yeah, this thing was a flop. So much so that after the end of 2012, Sony was no longer even reporting sales figures on the thing, which I'd like to believe when companies don't report sales figures on the systems they released, that's honestly one of the biggest ways to kind of wave the white flag. Because if the thing was doing well, you wouldn't have to hide how much it's selling. Let's be real. But the Vita's failure kind of helped Nintendo in a big way, because it basically handed the Nintendo 3DS a free win for the generation. Like I said, during the DS era, the PSP was, if nothing else, decent enough competition, and like I said, it sold well enough for Sony that it can actually be looked at as one of the few non-Nintendo handhelds to kind of have some success on the market. But with the Vita's best laid plans going to shit, the 3DS had basically no competition in the handheld market. Well, I mean, it did have mobile games, which the DS itself kind of created that market in a way, if you really think about it. But you get what I mean. Mobile gaming did spring from the DS's loins, but as far as dedicated handheld gaming devices, no one was coming for the 3DS's throne, no matter how well it did. But even with the free win, Nintendo still dropped a steady diet of 3DS games in 2012, and even a new hardware revision, the Nintendo 3DS XL. And honestly, having one myself, I don't think I could ever hold an OG 3DS after playing with one, because good God, the original just feels absolutely puny compared to this thing. It feels like a dog that you could stick in your purse compared to the 3DS XL. Matter of fact, here's mine. My 3DS XL. It's the Mario and Luigi special edition thing that came out for the year of Luigi. And it might have been hard to tell, but that thing is massive. But it was a good thing the 3DS was dominating, because the console side of things for Nintendo took a huge turn for the worse in 2012. The Wii was officially at a point of being out of style in 2012, and even though Nintendo dropped a few solid exclusives for it in its last year, very few people were gonna buy a Wii at that point. Of course, this was also bound to happen because 2012 was the year of Nintendo's next home console, the Wii U. I could honestly make a full video about the Wii U if you let me, but I'll try to sum things up succinctly here. The Wii U was Nintendo's attempt to keep the Wii branding alive and make another console that really anyone could play, but simultaneously make a console that was meant to court the hardcore gamers that kind of looked down on Nintendo since at least the Nintendo 64 era. In essence, this was Nintendo wanting to have its cake and eat it too. Unfortunately, this thing was also Murphy's Law to the highest degree possible, because everything that could go wrong with it pretty much did. Bad name, weak hardware, lack of third-party support, poor online infrastructure in a time where online gaming was becoming incredibly popular, confusing tablet controller, Nintendo itself struggling to adjust to HD gaming, and going through long droughts of first-party games as a result. You name it. If it could go wrong, it did go wrong for Nintendo with the Wii U. And yes, it would actually build a very good lineup of first-party games eventually, and we will see that across the next few videos. But the damage was done early, and it was unable to avoid being Nintendo's worst-selling home console to date. Which is why it blows my mind when I go on Twitter and see this Wii U trending so often, and I see so many people spouting Wii U nostalgia. If you're so nostalgic for it, why didn't you buy one? Actually, weirdly enough, I have a lot of nostalgia for the Wii U, and mine is still actually right behind me right now. Matter of fact, I'll show it to you. Yep, there it is, even with the gamepad and everything. Pardon the mess in this area, but I still have my Wii U hooked up. Back in the day, I used to be one of those deluded Nintendo fans who couldn't criticize them if you paid me, and I'm not proud of it, but in my own little world, it was a fun time to live through. It was like Nintendo was like my little secret in a way. A lot of my friends didn't really play on the Wii U, but I was enjoying my time with it. And as someone who loves first-party Nintendo games, I personally had a lot of fun during the Wii U era because, like I said, it ended up building a pretty good library of first-party games. In fact, a really good library, I'd even argue. Even if, yes, it was objectively Nintendo's worst-selling home console. Again, I could make a full video about the Wii U by itself, but only if you guys really want that. Same thing with that video about 3D I mentioned in my 2011 video. If y'all are really interested in that, I'll do it at some point. But yeah, as rough as this thing was, we're going to be talking about the Wii U quite a bit throughout this series. As far as third-party news, there was barely much to discuss. Again though, maybe it's for the best that there's not a lot of third-party news, because now we could just get straight to the games. Now we're going to get into the snubs, the big games that I didn't play, and I will openly admit this right now. Part of why 2012 might have been a slower year for me is because a lot of the biggest games of 2012 I didn't play or just couldn't get into. So this section is going to be a bit longer than some other years. A lot of 2012's biggest games just didn't really sing to me that much, so maybe 2012 will be a better year to you guys, but just for me, it was a little unexciting. But as for those snubs, the biggest ones I could find at least, 2012 was the year of Mass Effect 3, which was a very well-received game, even if the ending was incredibly controversial. I know everyone's talked all about it. There was also Dishonored, which I have tried. It's just not really my kind of game. It's very stealth-focused and not really into stealth games that often. Borderlands 2, which I'm not really too into Borderlands to begin with. Convenient enough that I'm mentioning it now because as of the time of the filming of this video, the movie just came out, which probably is not exactly good news for a lot of you Borderlands fans. There's also Far Cry 3, which I know is a huge step forward for the Far Cry series, but again, I'm not huge into a lot of Ubisoft's games, so Far Cry doesn't really sing to me. The Walking Dead was a huge game in 2012, a big story-focused kind of game, but I didn't play that either, even though I do occasionally like some games that are in the style of The Walking Dead. 2012 was the year of Xenoblade Chronicles, which has become one of Nintendo's huge franchises, but again, I'm very picky with my RPGs, so I didn't play this one. Oh, and there was also Diablo 3, if you were able to play it much in 2012 because of Error 37. So yeah, those were probably a lot of 2012's biggest games, and I didn't really play them, so I know you're probably thinking, what the hell did I play in 2012? Well, let's start with the games that just missed the cut, of which there are a few. These are games that on my personal, 0 to 10 rating scale would be 7 out of 10 games. To get through them, there are 3 here. The first of them is Alan Wake's American Nightmare, which is a nice little bite-sized standalone expansion to Alan Wake, though it can feel a touch repetitive even despite its short length. Perhaps controversially, there's Journey, which despite being one of 2012's most critically acclaimed games, I personally think makes for a better experience than a game, given how minimal the gameplay is, but with how sweeping and beautiful the visuals and sound are, I would have liked to see this as a live concert of some sort. And then there's Kingdom Hearts 3D Dream Drop Distance, which was a nice little diversion, even though the more bite-sized nature of it did put me off a touch, especially given that I played it through an HD collection on a console. With that said, flow motion is one of the greatest things ever created in any video game. Just saying. So from here on out, it's cream before the crop games, because like I said, 2012 didn't have any games that I personally gave a 10 out of 10 to, so let's just jump into the cream before the crop. And yes, even though I didn't give a 10 out of 10, I will give one certain game a distinction of my game of the year, just so you know what my favorite would have been. With that said, there are a fair few games to jump into, so let's do it. I'll stand on it. Even though it didn't really get much love or discussion, I think that Poke Park 2 Wonders Beyond was actually better than the first game. It didn't really get that much love when it first came out, probably on account of being a late life Wii game that didn't feel like it had the biggest audience behind it to begin with, especially being a game that was meant for a very young audience. But it was honestly a very sweet little game that improved very nicely over the first one. The visuals are much more polished, and compared to the first game, the combat is actually far better too. It feels like the playable Pokemon, of which there are more now, it's not just Pikachu the whole time this time, have more varied movesets this time around, and it makes the combat sections a lot better to play. What's more, the controls are also refined so they don't feel as awkward or frustrating as they did at certain moments within the first game. And despite its vibrant, child-friendly look and appeal, the writing is actually a touch darker than you might expect for a game like this that looks so child-friendly and approachable. Not that it's not, just it can be a little darker than you might think. I do wish there were a few more mini-games this time around, but this is still a fun little game that I'd recommend seeking out if you can find it at a fair price. I don't think they ever would, but I totally wouldn't mind to see Nintendo or the Pokemon Company bring this subsection of Pokemon back with some kind of re-release or maybe another side game as like an appetizer at some point. I honestly think it could be pretty fun. Yes, yearly MLB The Show mention. Again, I won't be spending too long talking about MLB The Show here because you kind of know what to expect, but MLB 12 The Show was another game in the franchise I greatly enjoyed, of course. I've talked in this series about how much of a sucker I am for motion-controlled baseball games, and where MLB 11 only had PlayStation Move support for the Home Run Derby mode, this one had full move support for the entire game, which was honestly pretty awesome. I sunk a ridiculous amount of hours into this one for that alone, specifically doing a lot of hitting, because when it comes to baseball, I kind of prefer hitting more than pitching or defense or whatever else. Oh, and this game is also unique because to date, it's the only MLB The Show game where the player on the cover, in this case Adrian Gonzalez, or Agon as we like to call him, would be traded in the very year that they made the cover. The 2012 Boston Red Sox were an adventure. You just had to be there. There were other fun features too, but by this point MLB The Show was the best baseball franchise in gaming by a country mile, and one of the few left standing, so newer entries were largely focused on refining what was already there. Only a few times would there be major additions to the formula. I will point out, I actually did also play this game on the PS Vita. Other than some downloaded PS1 games, it's quite literally the only Vita game that I've actually played. That's right, I had a Vita at one point. Like I said, this is the only game I ever played on it. And I mean, it wasn't a bad try. It's the base game on a handheld, and it's much closer to the console variants than the PSP version was back in the day. But there were some clear corners cut. The frame rate in particular was pretty bad, and in a baseball game, yeah, you kind of need a decent frame rate because it's so timing focused. Still, MLB 12 is a game I have a particular fondness for, and it's still a plenty fun MLB The Show game. Okay. So I know these are largely different games and all, and it might be weird to combine them together, especially because a video this short might benefit from a longer discussion, but hey man, how much time can I really devote to 3 separate remaster collections featuring games I've already talked about? Most of these I could just sit here and repeat the line, yeah, these are great games and the remastering job is very good, but that wouldn't be fun, would it? But yes, 2012 was the year of Sony remaster collections, and honestly, this wasn't even close to all of them. Don't even get me started on the fact that in 2012 we had a Dragon Ball Z Budokai remaster collection. And I actually own a copy. But these PS3 collections are actually significant to me because they were the versions of these games that I myself actually played when I first got into these franchises. Well, outside of the Devil May Cry HD collection, because I played that on PS4, not PS3, but same basic factor. And they're very nice releases. They have their warts, like Ratchet's frame rate and Devil May Cry's inconsistent aspect ratio, but they're all very nice ways to experience these games. And as for the God of War saga, well, it's basically just a repackaging of the last 2 God of War collections plus God of War 3, which is a hell of a deal, especially considering that it was $30 at launch. Of course, if you already own the games, it was a wildly redundant purchase, but quite frankly, you weren't going to find a more comprehensive God of War set anywhere at the time. And yeah, you can kind of apply that to all these collections. If you already own the game, there wasn't a reason to get them again, but for someone like me, this was my gateway into these franchises, so obviously that's kind of cherished and important. So yeah, these remaster collections were good for that, even if there's probably a lot you can complain about with remaster collections as a whole. And you could possibly even look at 2012 as the year where remaster collections were really starting to reach a fever pitch, so if you want to blame it for that, I mean, go right ahead. Get ready for me to talk a decent bit about Skylanders over the next few videos in this series, and being quite honest, Skylanders Giants is one of the entries in the series that I have an incredible fondness for. Weirdly enough, I wouldn't fully beat the first entry, Spyro's Adventure, until after Giants, so Giants was the first Skylanders game that I fully played through, specifically in co-op with my brother. So again, it's obviously quite cherished for me in that regard, but it also helps that I think Giants is just a wholesale improvement over the first game. The level design is far more clever, the visuals are much more polished, and the overall feel of the gameplay is far faster than what the first game offered, which is a blessing. Going back to Spyro's Adventure after Giants felt like walking in molasses, honestly. Also, this was obviously the point in the series where new Skylanders all had some kind of gimmick, and in this game, as the title suggests, we had the Giants, which were just bigger, more powerful versions of Skylanders. Exactly what it says on the tin, but the Giants themselves were awesome. I loved how powerful they felt, and they were among my favorite Skylanders characters, period. The Giants specifically made me sad that the gimmicks of Skylanders games were only left to be one-offs. It would have been nice to see them use the Giants even more in later entries. It's still weird that in this game you couldn't jump, but this is one of my favorite entries in the series, and even if it was a money-grabbing gimmick like Activision is very well known for, at least the games themselves were still very high quality. And if you could find them for a decent price today, I can still recommend checking them out. I know, for some, this was the point in time where Halo took a giant downturn, and I get it. 343 Industries has done things to the Halo franchise that much of the hardcore fanbase will never forgive. Let it be known as well that I'm not going to talk about Halo 5 Guardians in the 2015 video because I really don't like that game. But honestly, Halo 4 is still a game that I greatly enjoy. It's much more cinematic in its presentation than the previous titles in the series. Those visuals really are goddamn beautiful. But I'm happy to say that this doesn't come at the expense of the gameplay. This is a first-person shooter that still feels fluid and excellent to control, and the overall campaign structure feels very well-paced and enjoyable with plenty of polish. Yes, we can talk about how 343 Industries has messed up the story of Halo until the cows come home at this point, but as someone who's not a huge story guy when it comes to my games, I know, strike me down, I'm here for the gameplay, and in that regard, 343 definitely nailed it with this one. I would honestly go as far as to say it's one of my personal favorites in the Halo series. I can see why others were none too fond of it, but for me, I thought it was a great ride. Though the series would definitely move in some very strange and sometimes bad directions after this one. Okay, here we go. The point in the series where you see that I have too strong of a fondness toward Wii U games, but also the point in the series where I get to talk about a game that I have been an incredibly strong advocate for, Nintendo Land. One of only 2 first-party Wii U games released at launch, Nintendo Land has become something of an obscure Nintendo release, probably owing to the fact that it's stuck on the Wii U and kind of needs to be stuck on the Wii U. Unlike many Wii U games that would be reissued on the Switch and would do incredibly well, this game has not been reissued on the Switch, which you will understand why in a minute. But Nintendo Land was basically Nintendo's Wii Sports-esque pack-in game for the Wii U, even though it was not packed in with every Wii U and it was still available to buy on its own. And it was made to show what the gamepad controller was capable of, as well as showing the console's capabilities for asynchronous gameplay, which the Wii U largely failed to live up to during its life. And honestly, even for it being a pack-in game of sorts, it was a damn fun party game. The minigames featured here are a lot of fun whether you're playing on the TV or on the gamepad, and it's especially great when you have 5 people to play it with. It gets very chaotic and, quite frankly, very hilarious when you have 5 people to play it with. What's more, as much as Wii U has become the icon for Nintendo, I'd honestly argue that Nintendo Land is better than Wii Sports in a lot of ways. Compared to that game and Nintendo's later launch tech demo 1-2 Switch, Nintendo Land actually feels like a game with some meat on the bone. It's not like Wii Sports where it's a game that you can play for a bit and then put it down and never really come back to it again. There's plenty of content here for both the single player and multiplayer component that make it worth replaying over and over and over again. I have a bevy of fantastic memories playing this game with friends and family, and I think it remains one of Nintendo's most underrated titles. It does suck that no Wii U game was really able to live up to the console's promise as far as asymmetric gameplay is concerned, to the degree that this one did, nor were they quite able to justify the gamepad as a controller much. But for a moment, Nintendo Land made the possibilities feel endless. And even beyond the soft spot that I had for it and the memories that it gave me, it's still a game I love to pull out from time to time to enjoy with friends. Definitely look into this one if you haven't played it. It's really, really fun. But again, there is one game that topped them all, my game of the year for 2012, and no matter what I picked, I felt like it was going to be a little unpopular, so I'm just going with my heart on this one, I guess. My favorite game of 2012... New Super Mario Bros. U? Okay, fine, you got me. Another Mario game wins Game of the Year. Granted, not every Mario game has been Game of the Year on my list, but you get what I mean. Trust me though, 2012 was a largely bland year for gaming, like I said, and a lot of the year's best titles were games I just wasn't really into, so it was pretty tough to decide who was gonna be the winner, so to speak, in my book. Really, the top 3 was down to Mario U, Halo 4, and Skylanders Giants, and I feel like no matter which one I chose, very few were going to be happy with me or agree with me, honestly. Thus, going with my heart and my gut, yeah, I gotta say New Super Mario Bros. U. Even back at a time when I was trying to wean myself off of my Guitar Hero, baseball, Super Smash Bros. Addictions, I played this game way too many times to count, in both single player and multiplayer. And yes, I can at least acknowledge that quite a bit of my enjoyment of this game is tied to nostalgia, as I played it a lot with my brother and close friends in 4-player, and as you could expect from a multiplayer Mario game, it was a riot. I took pleasure in trolling them by constantly jumping into the bubble after they all died, until I got attacked by a shoe as a result. It didn't actually hurt, but I had it coming. But even when I played the game in single player, I still loved it, and as popular as New Super Mario Bros. Wii was, I actually liked this game a lot more. In fact, playing New Super Mario Bros. Wii after this made me appreciate New Super Mario Bros. U a lot more. I thought this game felt smoother and faster, the level design was much more interesting, and it felt like there was a good amount of challenge without being too overwhelming. Sure, it was a very safe launch game for the Wii U, but a game like this proved to me that Nintendo could still get incredibly creative even when they were working with a familiar formula. And that's kind of the thing that's really made Nintendo so appealing, is even if they stick to the same few franchises, which I don't really think they do, but nevertheless, they know how to refine and polish and pull a lot out of familiarity when they are working with familiarity. Honestly, I might have to go back to this game at some point and replay it. I have a strong fondness toward it, and it's still a game I love to this day. And I'm glad to see it manage to get a second chance at life with a Switch re-release back in 2019, which I might jump on if I do choose to replay this game. It's definitely worthy of that second shot in the arm of life. And yeah, even if it's no one else's pick, New Super Mario Bros. U is the game I enjoyed the most in 2012. So yeah, that's 2012 in gaming. Kind of bland year. Some games that I do have a lot of great memories with, but ultimately, yeah, not the strongest year that we've talked about thus far. And even though it gave me a console that I have an extreme sense of nostalgia and fondness for, that doesn't mean the console itself was incredible, and it doesn't really help 2012 as a year as a whole. With that said, 2013 is one of my favorite years in gaming, and I simultaneously can't wait to make that video and also can. I can't wait because I'm going to be talking about a lot of games that I love, and I can wait because the video is probably going to end up being an hour. Well, here goes nothing. Until then, though, this is all just my opinion on 2012 as a year in gaming. What did you guys think about it? Did you love 2012 as a year more than I did? What were your favorite games of the year? Maybe some games I totally didn't talk about whatsoever. What are some of your great gaming memories from 2012? And obviously, every video I like to have a specific question that's just meant for the one video. And given that we talked about it, what's your Wii U experience? If you have any. Do you have a Wii U? Did you ever have one? Do you have a lot of experience with it? Do you not have a lot of experience with it? I suppose you could also do that with the PlayStation Vita too, since I mentioned that, but either way, whatever your thoughts, opinions, and experiences are, leave them down in the comments below. Let's keep this civil and have some fun as we like to do. If you guys want to hit like and subscribe and support some of my other ventures that I have linked in the description, thank you. If not, it's no big deal. I totally understand. And like I said, 2013's up next. And given that this video's raw footage is at about 45 minutes, I'm terrified of how much raw footage there's going to be in the 2013 video because, like I said, 2013, one of my favorite years in gaming. We are going to have a lot to talk about. So stay tuned for that, but until then, thank you guys for watching. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you in the next video. Peace.